in memory of all those who gave their lives for peace and democracy in Cambodia. These are the words in the beginning of a book which I published a few weeks ago on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of UN peacekeeping in Cambodia. Certainly more than 20 young people lost their lives in the course of UN peacekeeping operation in Cambodia. I'd like to make the point that these valuable lives were not lost in vain. There were 2 Japanese also among these 20 who lost their lives. One is Mr. Nakada, who was one of the UN volunteers, and the other is Mr. Takada, one of the civilian policemen who were sent also in the frontier region of Cambodia. I met with the family of Mr. Nakada 2 days after his death. And contrary to my expectations, I saw the father of Mr. Takada smiling. I was surprised, but he said he was happy that his son lost his life in the course of the duty of safeguarding peace in Cambodia. He meant it. And in the case of Mr. Takada, he was killed in the region frequented by Khmer Rouge faction, which was resisting UN peacekeeping in the northern part of Cambodia. Not only he, but several other colleagues of him were also injured. There were also sacrifices among 1 or 2 other countries' troops. And in total, 44 different countries participated in the UN peacekeeping in 1992 and 93 in Cambodia. And among those 44 countries, there were Japan, China, and Germany, which participated for the first time in such UN venture. And the Cambodian operation was certainly the largest and the most impressive of the peacekeeping operations in the first half of the 1990s. Other than Cambodia, in Mozambique and in Namibia, UN also had successful operations. But in the second part of 1990s, things got very tough. And UN operations in Somalia, Rwanda, and former Yugoslavia were much more difficult and full of setbacks. So UN took stock of these experiences, and in the new century, 21st century, UN peacekeeping was reformulated and became more effective afterwards. Certainly, there were crises in the course of our operation in Cambodia in 92 and 93. In June 92, for instance, Khmer Rouge, despite all our efforts to satisfy their demands, refused to enter into the second phase of ceasefire, which was for cantonment, disarmament, and demobilization. And in November that year, we had another crisis in which Prince Sihanouk refused to go back to Cambodia from Phnom Penh, where he had stayed. he was not very happy with his own position, and I had to make a great deal of effort to persuade him to again cooperate with the UN efforts. And in the same manner, in April and May 93, as free and democratic elections by UN approached, there were Khmer Rouge attacks here and there, and mass media in the world became rather skeptical and pessimistic about the peaceful outcome which all intended to achieve. And UN volunteers, young people, became very uncertain whether there was any purpose to be achieved in such situation to create democracy in such unstable country. And what I told these people is that certainly environment is not very favorable to the creation of free and democratic elections, but the people of Cambodia wanted to vote their free desire. And therefore, we cannot refuse sowing as strong seeds as possible of democracy in that country. And after our departure, people of Cambodia will water and fertilize these seeds of democracy so that they will create strong democracy themselves afterwards. Also, we argued whether we can adhere always to the values, universal values of democracy, or we have to make adjustments to regional or national values. One can always argue to what extent we have to compromise with traditional autocracies and to what extent we can grant freedom of expression. Certainly there were weaknesses in UN peacekeeping operation in Cambodia. First of all, the preparatory time was very insufficient, and it took a lot of time to assemble troops, civilian police, as well as civilian administrators. Particularly, there was a shortage of civilian policemen and civilian administrators. UN did not have these people. Therefore, we had to recruit them from UN member states from all over the world, and it took time. Also, persuading Khmer Rouge or Pol Pot faction to cooperate with the UN was difficult. They said Vietnamese troops were still present and hiding in Cambodia. So we searched everywhere. We asked for information, and we created more checkposts on the border between Cambodia and Vietnam. We also complied with the desire for the creation of a special prosecutor's position within UN organization in Cambodia, and they were created. We also decided to amend the electoral law, which we drafted, and in compliance with the prevailing desire of Cambodian factions, we amended the Paris Agreement's draft, and UN headquarters was not happy, but we nevertheless told them that this is the majority strong desire on the part of Cambodian people. So we introduced democratic education, and UN, for the first time in its history, created UN broadcasting station, which broadcast all over Cambodia, and it was very effective in a country where majority of people were not able to read. And we postulated that there should be at least 6 weeks of free and intensive campaigns by all political parties. We also encouraged non-governmental organizations to emerge, and lo and behold, more than 150,000 Cambodians decided to create and continue with their own non-governmental organizations for human rights and democracy. And I must say, UN Security Council in New York, and we in the field cooperated with each other very closely. And it was a time of immediate post-Cold War period, so there was a prevailing optimism that the world should be able to become more peaceful and more cooperative on the basis of the call by the United Nations. And in the case of Cambodian peacekeeping, permanent 5 countries, and China and Vietnam, and other regional powers like Japan, Indonesia, and Australia were very active and very supportive of our efforts. And on the basis of Japan's initiative, there was a rehabilitation conference which was convened in Tokyo in June '92, and Japan and Thailand worked together to persuade Khmer Rouge to accept UN policies. And fortunately, in the capital of Cambodia, Phnom Penh, we were able to bring together ambassadors of 10 countries in particular, permanent 5 plus Japan, Australia, and the Indonesia, and later Thailand. And they together consulted with me as often as necessary, and we made sure that there's no gap or discrepancy between what the Security Council tells us and what our requirements and the problems in the field. And our basic policy to which we adhered was that we should not use force under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. We were created under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, which calls for peace through negotiation and mutual concessions. So there was a good combination of negotiation through peaceful means and pressure short of military means, that is all kinds of economic, political, and psychological pressures which were allowed, in our opinion, under the Charter for us. And after the free and fair elections, Hun Sinpec of Prince Ranat came out first, and the People's Party of Mr. Hun Sen came out second. In the judgment of Prince Sihanouk, which I supported, there had to be a creation of a coalition between the 2 foremost political parties, Hun Sinpec of Ranat and People's Party of Hun Sen. And Prince Sihanouk was to be the king, and underneath the king, 2 co-prime ministers, Ranat and Hun Sen, will be 2 heads of government. I, as well as expanded group of 10, supported Prince Sihanouk's judgment in that regard. Hun Sinpec, as the first political party, represented legitimacy of the government and participation of the People's Party, which controlled the armed forces, the police, and as well as the administration, represented the reality of Cambodia. This coalition government lasted for 4 or 5 years until a coup d'etat took place, which enabled Mr. Hun Sen to become single prime minister. UN used more than $2 billion of its budget, but we were able to complete our task within the 1 hour and a half, which had been decided by UN Security Council. I'd like to think that the spirit of peace and democracy, which we try to instill in Cambodia, is still persistent in that country. I hope Cambodia is approaching the ideals step by step, although there are some setbacks and difficulties on the way. I like to think that Cambodian peacekeeping in those years of 1992 and 93 is a proof of a strong hope for peace, stability, and prosperity being achieved through our joint efforts and through perseverance of the entire international community. And so I like to believe that those variable sacrifices were not in vain, but were in the within the aspirations adhered to by all people in the world, including, of course, those 44 countries who participated in the Cambodian peacekeeping 25 years ago. Thank you very much.